All right, on this episode of Making the Argument, we're going to give you perhaps some of the best analysis, best insight you could ever hope for, especially if you're single. That's right, because today we're going to be talking a little bit about what should you look for in a spouse and why has it gotten so difficult. And spoiler alert, we're probably going to be trashing a lot of Disney, Instagram, and Hallmark in this episode, but we're actually going to give you some really good reasons why, and we're going to dispel this notion. And this is the part that gets a little controversial. I'm going to dispel the notion that what the real problem is that you just need to lower your expectations. That is false. As always, I'm your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates, but other than that, a good person. With me, as always, my beautiful bride, and proof that I might know what I'm talking about on this topic, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
Our political prognosticator and resident historian, Christian Hines.
I have no clue what I'm doing here for this episode.
I'm not saying we did this episode for you,
I'm
but maybe
proof that I don't know what we're about to be talking
this episode might be a little bit less talky, a little more listeny for you.
Yeah,
And then we have Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
It's a pleasure to be here, Nick. I think I may learn a lot today because I'm in the same boat as Christian.
All right, and then, of course, our producer of producers, Sour Patch Lids, and Newlywed, here to give that advice as well. So we've got a newlywed, we've got some old weds, and we've got some never weds.
Two bachelors. Yeah. So any of you
bachelors.
Ladies out there who are single.
Somebody who's looking for a little something, maybe a husband for Christmas. Well, we've got two prospects for you right now.
Just keep in mind, Christian and I are in volley.
That's right. They're over there. There you go. This is our dating app now. I love it.
Okay, well, listen, so we've actually been talking about this for a while now, and we had an interesting conversation because we were all talking about, obviously there's a lot of people out there on social media giving various advice. I think Jordan Peterson has given some really good advice.
There's also a lot of bad advice.
A lot of bad advice. Oh, my God. What was the clip you sent me?
It was from the Fresh and Fit podcast down in Miami. It's kind of hilarious to listen to because it illustrates very well how the expectations of one side of this conversation and the other side of this conversation are completely indifferent.
Well, and I one of the ones that I found very interesting is there's a site called Just Pearly Things
on YouTube.
And on YouTube, and she talks about kind of the expectations that women go into relationships now versus what men go into. And she actually sticks up for men a lot, saying that women kind of come right out now and say, hey, these are my expectations. You better make it. I'm a queen. I deserve all of this. But if a man were to articulate the same expectations, he would be considered kind of a jerk. Now that's not to say that we should open this up and men should be jerks. It's more about understanding what the issues are. But one of the things that I see, like I will see so many people on social media as they're giving advice on relationships, on potentially looking at marriage. One of the common things that they say is that people need to lower their expectations, that they've been giving these ridiculously high expectations from Hollywood or from pop culture or from filter apps or whatever it is. Right? You learn it young from Disney, right? It's the prince that's going to show up or it's the princess you're going to find. And then it's Instagram and hookup culture with everything that we have on social media. And then as you're older and lonely and trying to make sense of your life, it's Hallmark movies, right? And all of them are crap. Can I just say that right now? All of them are crap. But a lot of people, I think, have learned the wrong lesson because what they do is they look at all that and say, oh, yeah, well, they've created these ridiculously high expectations. And if you really want to find someone that you can have a good marriage with, you need to lower your expectations. Garbage. Absolute garbage.
Now, what kind of expectations are you thinking of, Nick?
I don't think that the expectations that you see in Disney, and certainly not on social media or like the hookup culture, and not even a Hallmark. I don't think any of them are high expectations. I think they're stupid expectations.
But just to clarify, if Christian and I are looking for a 10, that would be an expectation that should be lowered.
Well,
no.
What's your version of a 10?
Yeah, exactly.
This is not the case. I'm making this clear.
Oh, okay.
It's not the case. But let's
this.
just say, for instance, Christian and I wanted a 10 out of 10, and that was all we were going to go for. Physical attractiveness.
So here's what
I just wanted to clarify that.
Here's the problem that I have with this whole concept of what expectations are supposed to be is that my point is that like Disney, social media, Hallmark, they're not creating high expectations. They're creating stupid ones.
Okay.
Right? I'm sorry, but my wife, 10 out of 10 for me.
Sure.
Absolute 10 out of 10. And that's all I was willing to settle for. And I don't apologize for that. And look, I feel very blessed. I found it at 19.
Yeah.
Okay, but the thing that I like to tell people is it's not about lowering your expectations. It's about figuring out what should your expectations be in order to get the most out of like your marriage that you can possibly expect. And again, I come from a Christian worldview, and so I place a very, very high premium. Like this is the most important relationship you will have outside of your relationship with God, right? So of course you should go into it with high expectations, right?
You kind of like confused me earlier when you were saying like, you know, talking about expectations and saying, you know, when people say lower your expectations, that's garbage. I disagree with you, but maybe it's because we're using different terms for expectations.
It depends on your metrics, really. You've got to kind of define your terms.
I don't think you and I are defining expectations the exact same way,
And
because
that
I was
is the-
defining expectations the way that Hamilton was defining it.
And that's the first thing that needs to be fixed, because a lot of the way that we define these things has been taught to us, again, by social institutions that are setting expectations not too high. They're setting the wrong sort of expectations.
Well, I mean, most social media is so polished now. You've got women who can't put a picture up without putting a filter on their face first and cinching in their waist and, you know, expanding their bosom or whatever. And I mean, sometimes they do it surgically. Sometimes they just do it with the photo app. And here's the problem is even that woman who is the picture of the physical 10 isn't a 10 in real life if you're using that picture as your base, because she's polishing herself up. She's putting a filter on her face. She's, you know, narrowing out her nose and making her eyes look bigger and fixing all the little imperfections on her skin. I mean, the problem is I do think that people's mental image of what beauty is has really been morphed, and now people are all starting to look similar.
Well, Tina, you've just been brainwashed by the heteronormative, you know.
Well, no,
Candace Owens just got into big snafu with women because she said she wanted to know if men really think that lip fillers and all of these things, you know, nipping and tucking and all of this actually looks attractive. Here's the problem is that if the people do it well, you won't even know they did it. Right. And so there is what we find unattractive is the overuse of that. But there's a lot of women walking around where you would have no idea they actually had any of that done.
But you see where we've started this entire conversation, right? This entire conversation has started off with physical appearance.
Right.
Because physical appearance is important. I'm not going to say it's not a factor.
It's the first thing that attracts you to a person.
It's the first thing that you see, and it's the first thing that you use to essentially we can't use the word discriminate anymore because it sounds bad, but I mean that in the intellectual sense where you differentiate between something that you prefer versus something that you don't prefer. But it's obviously one of the first things that you see. And attraction matters, right? It absolutely matters. The idea that physical attraction doesn't matter at all, or like a really truly good person doesn't really even care about that stuff. Okay, let's not live in la la land. People do care about physical attraction to another person. However, when we talk about what should your expectations be for marriage, the first question I have for something is, I don't know, what do you expect to get out of your marriage? Like, what's your marriage actually built upon? Because again, if it's built upon Disney, then you have this false notion of what marriage actually looks like, because I don't know if you've noticed this, Disney never goes into marriage. Right. Disney goes into weddings.
Yep.
Right. Disney goes into a big thing, and then there's a big wedding, and then people ride off into the sunset.
And the wedding saves her from everything.
Right. And then Instagram and hookup culture and all that is all focused on the physical attraction and using another person to essentially satiate your lust. Right. And then what's Hallmark? Right. Because theoretically, Hallmark is the most defined storyline out of all of this. Hallmark also doesn't go into marriage. It just goes into the romance, the dating, and the wedding. But the other thing that I think is interesting and completely ridiculous about that is that, look, every Hallmark, let me just go in and give you every Hallmark movie. Like, she had a high-paying, high-demand job in the city, and then she went home for Christmas, and she fell in love with the nice, romantic, curiously good-looking single-father baker.
Artisan baker.
And then she gave up her high-powered career because she fell in love. And now she wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, 6 days out of the week to bake bread. I don't think so. Right? That's not a reasonable expectation either. Like, she had certain goals, interests for her life, and now it's like real love is when you give up all of that for the really good-looking single dad baker.
One comment and a question. My first comment is, if people were as interested in storylines about marriage as they were about engagements and
Yeah.
weddings, they would make movies about marriage.
Well, no, so here's what I will tell
And that's
you.
very telling.
And once upon
It is.
upon a time, we had a lot more shows and sitcoms that really elevated the whole concept of marriage. Now, people look at it now and say, "Oh, that was, they're horrible patriarchal, society," and that was
Like Disney alone, if you watch any of their kid movies or shows, the mom and dad, like the dad is always a total doofus and
He's an idiot.
and he's a big lunk and always thinks the wrong way, and the mom's always got to correct it, and the mom's always got these secrets with her and her kids, and like they have the connection, but then dad's this douchebag off somewhere.
He's a loser
whatever.
usually.
And and he's usually like the comic relief because he's a moron. That is what is being framed up in these people's mind of, oh, well, when you get married, you have, like 3 kids instead of 2 because your husband's always going to be a child.
Yeah.
And it really has done a disservice to real men. And some of it is because of the feminization of men, that there are a lot of men like that, where they are betas. And or we affectionately call them soy boys, where it's like, and I have a theory about that with the whole birth control thing and what people are attracted to while they're on birth control. But anyway, the point being that I think that this has skewed what people think a marriage would be. And you've got this massive wedding industry where it's like, you're going to be a princess for a day. You're the queen for the day. And you've created these bridezillas, and they need everything to be visually perfect. They put more money, more effort, and more work into the day of the wedding than they do in the rest of the marriage. And they get home.
That was a profound statement right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, it's true. You've got like the average wedding is like 30 grand now.
that's nuts.
And it used to be that people save that money for a down payment on a home, or they're like saving it for their future. One day they're going to blow that amount of money. And chances are they're not going to do the work to maintain that marriage on the other end of it. Maybe they haven't even had the correct conversations or seen the red flags or anything like that beforehand, because they were so blinded by the idea of love and the idea of getting married.
Well, but that's my point, is once we get into this, defining your terms is important, because when we talk about the idea of love or the idea of romance or the idea of a wedding or the idea of marriage, ideas from who, right? Who gave us the ideas that we have about these things? Because if your ideas about these things came from Hollywood, I've got horrible news. Right? They're never going to live up to what your expectations are, not because your standards are too high. It's because the standards that you were given, the expectations you were fed, are incorrect. They are wrong. And in fact, they're robbing you of something so much better. That's the reason why I hate it when we tell young men and women, lower your standards, lower your expectations. No. Your expectations and your standards should be through the roof on the things that truly matter to make a good marriage.
So what matters?
Excellent question,
Hold on.
Christian. So glad you asked.
Before
I feel
you
like
go-
that was a segue. That was an unintentional segue to
Before
it.
you go into that, though, I want to put out there the concept that it's not about lowering your standards so much as it is examine your standards and rise to your own standards
yes.
so that you can attract the type of person that you want.
I think that's true, but the first step is not even rising to your own standards. The first step is making sure you have the right standards for what constitutes an actual good marriage.
Yeah.
Now, this is the part where we have some viewers of this show that love our show that sometimes are like, well, Nick, you kind of lay on the Christianity a little thick sometimes. Yep, sorry. It's what I believe. So if I believe it's to be true, I'm going to share with you what I believe the truth to be. Now, am I saying this because I believe that nobody has a good marriage unless you're a Christian, or that all Christians have great marriages? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that we've been married almost 24 years. And as I explained it to somebody once, in that 24 years, it's not like it's been, puppy dogs and lollipops. I mean, we got married at 19 and 20, had no money, lived in a crappy apartment in a dangerous part of town. I was gone half the year because I was in the military. For our first 10 years of marriage, I was gone for half of it.
First 11 years, we were only together for 6 of it.
Yeah. And in this time, we are moving 7 times. We are, we have 3 kids. We have like all the, I'm going to war. I'm going overseas. right? Like all of these things that are happening where if you look at stressors within life, right? Things like having to move, deaths in the family, time apart, combat, right? These are all stressors on a marriage. And I can honestly say it's not like there haven't been times where like there was, better seasons than other ones, but at no point did I ever feel like my marriage was really in danger. Through all of that. Never felt that. Now, is this because I am just so good at this husband thing?
It sounds like it.
No. Right? No, it
but
is
you know
not.
what we do? We periodically do like a sanity check just to like check and see how we're doing. And it's funny because, well, it's not funny. It's sad. But when we were a military family and we saw a lot of relationships rise and fall, a lot of relationships and marriages crumble and people cheating on their spouses and various things like that. And, you could usually peg which ones might do that type of thing and which ones wouldn't. A lot of people would say, oh, you don't want to go special forces, Nick. Look at the divorce rate. And that divorce
As
rate.
if that's a thing that just happens when you go to special, as if they line you up once you get your ODA and be like, all right, 6 of you are getting divorced. We're going to go ahead and point them out right now.
Yeah. And so it was really interesting to me because that divorce rate has nothing to do with him and I and our relationship as long as we maintain it. You have to do the maintenance. You have to make sure that you're on the same page. And sometimes you're going to have a little drift, like you're so caught up with the kids and you're exhausted and you've changed your 50th diaper for the week. And
I've just gotten orders for another deployment or school or something.
And, but the point I was going to make is that you're going to have moments where you're not really feeling as connected as you should. And those are the moments where you need to reconnect. You have to.
The thing is though, is I don't want to get too far ahead with respect to how do you maintain a good marriage. I want to start off with how do you even get there?
I was about to ask.
When you talk about the sanity checks, the first sanity check we did was not 5 years into our marriage. It was when we were dating and realizing that, you know what, this might be going a little bit farther.
I was literally about to ask that question because, like, for somebody like Hamilton and I, how to maintain a marriage matter if
you can't even find
we're not even in a relationship?
Well, okay, the only reason I brought that up is because some people will look at it and go, "Oh, well, Nick and Tina found each other and it was just a match made in heaven and it's perfect and that's just the existence of it." No. We are human beings. We have our own, battles within our mind or whatever we have, and we make this work. So it's not that we were just these two soulmates out there and found each other. It's that we did the work to be that.
And both of us came from families where my parents divorced, remarried, divorced.
Yep, same with mine.
Right.
Tina's parents divorced, remarried. Like this, it's not as if, again, we grew up with the Waltons and we just emulated what we saw. That's not what happened.
Who are the Waltons?
Shut up.
But we didn't want to be that statistic in the family. Like the first marriage of each of our parents only, lasted a certain amount of time. And so
No, so so step one is, and this is what's critical here, right? And so we kind of laid out what are our bona fides. Why do Tina and I think we can actually talk about this with some degree of, authority. Step one, the first thing that I think both of us were looking for was not just physical attraction, or did we have similar interests, or do we have similar life goals? The first thing we were interested was worldview. And what I mean by that is like everybody in the world has a worldview. You can't get around it. It's the way that you make sense of the things that you see around you. It's the values you take into your decision-making processes. It's the thought process that you use to come to conclusions. And honestly, your theology is the most important. Now, for those of you who are atheists, okay, fine, you're an atheist. But your theology, right, the starting point of your worldview always starts with that question. And her and I had the same theology. Right, we were both Christians. We both believed in Scripture. We had that foundation. The reason why that's so critical is because, again, when it comes to things like your theology, and to some degree, to a lesser extent, but it's still important when it comes to things like your politics, right? This is not just are you a Republican or a Democrat, right? This is how do you view situations within the world. What thought process do you go through to try to come up with ways to creatively solve those challenges that you're going to face? And what value system do you bring along? And I will tell you right now that if your theology is completely different, if your politics, and again, I don't mean political party, I mean the way you explain challenges and problems in the world, if they're totally different, that is going to be very, very difficult for you to come to sound conclusions for a lot of things that you face, and it's going to become really difficult once you start having kids. Because once you start having kids, you are raising your children in the way that they should go, right? You are teaching them how to think through things, and you are extending your values to them. And so right off the bat, if you have totally different worldviews, or worse yet, you have worldviews that conflict with one another, I don't care how physically attracted you are to that person. I don't care how many interests you might share. When it comes to the existential questions you face throughout your lives, you are not going to be on the same sheet of music. And so none of the other stuff is going to matter. You're going to find yourself, and this applies equally to men and women, right? Ladies, no matter how handsome he is, guys, no matter how beautiful she is, somebody somewhere is sick of their crap. Like, that's just the reality. All right. If you are not spiritually, emotionally, intellectually compatible, right, the physical compatibility is simply not going to matter over time. So when I talk about, raising your standards, I mean, first and foremost, you're setting down that foundation upon which everything else is going to be built. And yeah, I can tell you right now, I've told people this before, I can take you back to our freshman year where I was sitting in the classroom when Tina walked in the room. We didn't date for 4 years after that moment. So obviously I was physically attracted to her right off the bat. Right? But that wasn't enough for either one of us to all of a sudden start dating. There was other data, there was other information that was actually important to that process. And one of the things that really attracted me to Tina fairly early on, and again, we still didn't date immediately afterwards, is that I saw Tina in repeated situations in high school where if she thought something was correct or right, she didn't care what anybody else thought. She didn't care what the popular kids thought. She didn't care if it was correct and right, that's what she thought was the right thing to do, period, the end. And for me, that added to the physical attraction, right? That display of character and integrity and courage in those situations, even though they might have been, small in the big scheme of things. But when you're in high school, those things are pretty significant. And the fact that she was willing to stand up, that taught me something about her worldview that I got to see in action that was incredibly attractive to me. Now, was that me lowering my standards or expectations? No, I kept them high. Now, by the same token, and this goes to Tina's point earlier, as you're identifying these things that are really important to you with respect to your worldview, right, you also got to be thinking, am I living up to my own worldview? Because if you're not, you have no right to expect that of somebody else. But you shouldn't see that as poor as me, right? Why can't somebody just love me the way I am? What you should be seeing is, what? I want somebody that's incredible because I'm going to be spending the rest of my life, right? There's no exit strategy. I'm spending the rest of my life with them. And you know what? If I truly love them, then they also deserve somebody that they can admire and look up to and be attracted to in all those different ways.
So, Nick, there is an exit strategy, though, because 50% of all marriages end in divorce. It might actually be higher than that now. That's an older statistic. Like, why?
So that would be a red flag. So let's say you met somebody and you were talking with them.
By the way, I was not advocating for that.
No, I get
that wasn't me saying like, oh, you've always got this like emergency button you can press to end it.
But I remember having a conversation with a previous boyfriend in high school. I mean, we were just kids. But I remember talking about how important I thought it was to be married for life, and not to ever use the D word, divorce. Because I had lived through it with my parents and it was hard.
Same.
And it
my
hurt.
parents are divorced too.
Yeah. And it hurt. No matter how amicable it is, it hurts. And so when we were discussing, future and possible, like if you ever got married, would it be forever kind of thing. And this person told me, no, I wouldn't stay if I was unhappy. If I'm unhappy, I'm leaving. And I knew right then this boy is not somebody I want to be, connected to long term, because they already had a defeatist attitude about it. And the problem is that a lot of times it really takes two to make things good. And you have to ask those kind of deeper questions, like what is your view on divorce and what is your view on relationships? What is your relationship with your family like? You know, if they don't have a good relationship within the family and a good marriage wasn't modeled for them, it's possible they're going to be coming in with a lot of baggage. And so you need to like get to those questions early before the relationship starts to really come together, because you need to leave while you're not emotionally connected to the person. If you know for sure there are several things that are deal breakers and you're not going to get past them, you need to have those deeper questions. I saw a video recently where they were saying, you know, you're asking the wrong questions. You're asking what his favorite color is and where he likes to vacation and what he likes to do for hobbies. The real questions are, what's your relationship with your mother like? What's your relationship with your dad like? How does your dad treat your mother?
Well, and can I say this? That there are legitimate reasons why people get divorced, right? And I think it's always tragic in some sense, but there are definitely relationships where it is, you know, abusive ones and things like that.
Sure.
You know, rampant infidelity. Like I get all of that. The point I think that we're trying to make is that step one is that if you are not rooted in the same foundational worldview, I'm telling you right now, nothing else is really going to matter long term. Because you guys just simply do not see the world the same way. You do not attempt to solve problems the same way. And again, I don't even mean there can't be diversity of opinion with how to approach a particular problem. I'm talking about the foundational stuff. So once you've got that, right? And then there's the physical attraction point. Like Tina said, it's the first thing that you see. So obviously it's going to play a factor, and there's nothing wrong with that. But by the same token, you know, if that's all you're taking into consideration, that is going. It's not as if one day you're going to wake up and that doesn't matter. What's going to happen is that you're going to find out that it was nowhere near as important as the level that you put it at because of what Disney, social media, and Hallmark told you was important. The third thing I would say, and this is the part where I take issue with Hallmark, right? Is Hallmark has this idea that, you know, again, you know, she had this totally different career. He had this totally different career. And then they came home, and then what they really realized is they wanted to raise horses. No, they didn't, right? That is almost certainly not what they discovered at some point, right? If you had some sort of passion in your life on something that you wanted to do and accomplish, that passion should not be superior to your relationship with your spouse. But by the same token, if you really do have an interest and a passion and a talent for something and you want to pursue those things, right, there's probably a reason for that. And you should probably look for somebody that doesn't necessarily have the exact same objectives or maybe even the exact same interests, but those interests should not, you know, collide. It shouldn't be something where your interests or passions are completely contradictory to what their interests or passions. They should on some level be complementary.
Right, because if one person in the relationship is always the one sacrificing, you breed bitterness and resentment and things like that. And you can't go, oh, well, I just love this person so much that I'm just going to get up at 4 a.m. and break bread every day, like the scenario you already gave. No, you have to still have your interest, and that healthy relationship nurtures those interests. I mean, we have a situation where anything, I tend to be creative, and Nick totally he's like, yeah, do whatever you want. Oh, you know, I'll get you this thing so that you can make that. That's cool. You know, whatever.
People don't realize, like, Tina made this whole studio. Like, she made the table we're sitting at. She did the wall. She did the ceiling. She designed like everything that's, you know, that isn't like the camera or video equipment. Tina designed.
But the point is that, as much as possible, you can't be a hindrance to the other person's dreams.
Yeah.
You know, you have to try to make them work together. And, you know, I think that we definitely have a situation right now where, you know, you're meeting people, you're talking about your future and your career and all of that, and that's what you're deciding whether it aligns or not or whatever. But we kind of need to get into, where are you meeting these people?
Yeah.
And where are you going?
Question.
Yeah. Where are you going in order to try to find somebody? Now, Nick and we happened to meet in high school, which is wonderful for us. But most people are not in that kind of a situation. Most people, they're looking for someone. So let's say a guy wants to meet like a nice Christian girl who, has really good virtuous standards as far as how she carries herself and things like that. That's the nicest way I can put that. But then they're going clubbing to try to find this girl. And it's like, wait a minute.
Good luck.
The club is not going to be where that person is. And you at the club you're also not what that girl is looking for.
Yeah.
So
Right.
if you're like, oh, I want to find a nice Christian girl, but you're like, I never go to church and I never go to any Christian functions. And, I'm not part of any of these groups. I don't do a Bible study. I don't do any of that. Well, what makes you think a nice Christian girl wants you
Well,
at that point?
Right.
I feel personally attacked by that
Sorry.
statement.
I'm sorry.
No,
It's your sign.
It goes into the whole idea of, like, again, what is the first thing that you're using to set your expectations with respect to someone you're going to spend the rest of your life with, presumably raise children with, go through ups, downs, hardships, wonderful events, the whole deal, like formative things all your life. Okay, well, if worldview is the most important, then you have to go in the proximity of people that are most likely to share that same worldview.
Yep.
Right? That like this seems kind of obvious to me. And people will say, oh, well, opposites attract. Opposites attract, not with the fundamentals. Opposites attract with the peripheral thing.
That's just visual.
It's the person that's a little bit more introverted versus the person that's a little bit more extroverted, because the introverted person might be
balance
attracted
each
by
other
that
out.
extroverted person, whereas the extroverted person appreciates kind of like the peace and quiet that the introverted person provides, and so you grow together, because what you're seeing, that opposite that you're attracted to is something within your life that you might admire, but is diminished in your own capabilities. And so what happens is that you become more of a whole, person, personality wise or skill set wise or whatnot, because of the additional, skills or personality traits that they bring. But don't be confused that opposite attracts means at the fundamental you should be opposite. So step one is, if worldview is really important, and I'm telling you it is, then you have to go to places and you have to go to events and you have to go to environments where you're more likely to run into people that share your worldview. And Christian and I were talking about this yesterday. I said, this seems kind of ominous. Like, oh my gosh, there's 4.5 billion women in the world. I said, yep. And 98.99% of them are not going to be anyone they might be a wonderful, great person. And they live in Norway. So you ain't ever going to meet a man, right? Like, you don't got to worry about that one. All right. Sorry. The Viking girl is not going to be yours. Right. So again, proximity, where do you live? Right? Where are you at in your own life? And again, as a Christian, where are you on your own walk with Christ? Like, are you actually ready to be a husband and what all that means within that worldview? But, where are you at, and where are you more likely to find people that share that worldview? Go there.
Right. Yeah, I've always said that people should be trying to meet their spouses in a condition where they're working toward the same goal together, so that the focus is not on getting a date. It is on doing this thing. Like, volunteering springs to mind. Church certainly springs to mind, since there are so many opportunities to serve. You could also go to maybe something like a book club, or meet somebody in class like Nick and Tina did, which I think is really wonderful, because then Nick was at a distinct advantage because he was able to observe Tina over the course of time, being a lady of character. He's like, I'd really like to date this woman. She's very attractive to me, but is she a high quality person? I'll keep an eye on her. That really is like the ideal condition.
Is it observing, or when does observing become stalking?
Yeah, I was gonna say we're getting.
Yeah, that's fair. I
I get what you
Nick
mean, though,
never
Lydia.
Stalked. Yeah.
I don't think
But you know
that
what
Nick
I'm
is
saying. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're working toward the same goal, i.e. graduating high school, for example, or finishing a class strongly, finishing college, what have you, then the focus isn't on each other. I think there's such a narcissistic tendency to be like, oh, well, we're dating. That's all we're doing right now. Like, no, go do something interesting that helps other people. See if that's something that the other person's into. And that gets back to figuring out what your priorities are, what you want in a spouse, and how you're also developing yourself to be the best version of yourself, so you can be a good spouse for this right person wherever you meet them.
Absolutely. There's one other thing I wanted to bring up, and that is being physical in a relationship. If you're asking the right questions and you're really trying to develop character and learn who this person really is deep down, and you're having these deep conversations. You're on the phone for 3 hours or whatever. Maybe that doesn't happen anymore. Maybe Snapchat for 3 hours. I don't know. But you're spending all this time getting to know what's inside the mind of the other person. The minute you start getting physical with each other, all those questions start to disappear, and all you want to do is the physical stuff, because chemical reaction, it just is what it is. You push certain buttons and it has certain responses. So try your very best to hold off as much as possible on physical affection, I guess I would say.
Physical contact. Yeah.
Physical
Yeah.
stick to non-sexual contact.
Yeah.
And I have to say that because I feel like a lot of people, you watch them, really they're into this person and they're learning about this person, and you can always tell when it got physical.
Yep.
Because all of those big questions go away and they're no longer talking about what's inside the person's mind. They're talking about what they want to do to that person or with that
What's in
person.
their pants. Yes.
And I'll put it this way, not to get too personal. Obviously, we got married.
I have no idea what he's about to say. I'm so nervous
boy.
right now.
Again, 19 when I got married. So it was really popular with my Army buddies to essentially say, "Oh, you got married. You don't have any experience," and we all know what they meant by experience. And finally one day I just got tired of this. I looked back. I said, "Let me clarify something for you, dude. When you talk about experience, here's what that means for you. You have a lot of essentially insignificant trysts with women you didn't care about and who didn't care about you."
Right.
So the experiential relevance of that is the equivalent of you having a bunch of GEDs and people you're never going to see again and don't care about, right? I've been with one person that I love deeply, respect, and am passionate about. So you got a bunch of GEDs, dude, I got a PhD. Who do you really think knows what they're doing?
I like that.
Right.
That's
And-
awesome.
You do, honey.
But the whole
This has
point.
immediately gotten
Sorry,
awkward.
But no, the reason why this is important, right, is because the physical component is an important aspect of the relationship. But if you put it before the marriage, you will have problems. You will have problems that will become a distraction away from the things that you really need to discover about that other person in order to determine whether or not they're married. The only reason why I share the happy other side of that story is because you do need to understand that it is an important component of marriage, and it is a wonderful component of marriage when it is done correctly and within the proper boundaries. And again, this is another area where Hollywood tries to sensationalize and make appear really neat and wonderful and exciting this idea of
Hooking up.
Yeah, hooking up. Right, like, oh my gosh, it's the hunt, right? It's a new person, every time you go to the club or something like that. And then they try to minimize and make look stupid and boring that aspect of relationship with inside of marriage. And what we know, not just from I would say really from common sense and logic, but what we know from statistical analysis and data on this is the complete opposite is true. The people that are trying to recreate some sort of experience through hookup culture never seem to have a fulfilling physical relationship with other human beings, whereas those people who are in happy marriages, and again, this is so logical if people would just think about it for a second. All right. A bunch of people you don't know who don't care about you on any level are never going to be able to give you the sort of experience that is rooted in genuine trust, love, passion, and yes, communication. You only get that in a relationship where you are committed to someone for life in a healthy relationship where all of a sudden, like this is now an experience that you're having that is not just about your individual physical gratification. It is something so much more important than that, both in your relationship and also what it can mean for the creation of children, which is just really miraculous when you think about it. And so I want people to understand that when you are foregoing that, you are foregoing it because you are trading this really superficial, one-sided experience, because that's really what it is on a level. Yeah, the other person might be there, but believe me, you're there for you. And then all of a sudden you trade that for something that takes place within a loving marriage. Those two things are so incomparable as to not even be on the same spectrum when you really think about it logically.
Yeah.
Nick, I
think-
feel like that. Sorry, Lydia. I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Oh, you're good.
Nick, I feel like that we keep talking about marriage, but we're not really talking about relationships. Like, I in some ways, I feel like that we've still jumped the gun because a lot of people, and you and Hamilton showed me this video yesterday of this woman who was pointing out, like, you know, some of these statistics related to, I would argue, the disintegration of relationship building in America. It used to be, I feel like, a lot easier to find a healthy relationship and eventually a marriage than it is now. I feel like that now is probably the worst time in
I'd
the
agree.
history of this country
Yeah.
for finding a relationship and a marriage.
That's
which
because
is,
narcissism has been fostered in our society
see,
so
I don't,
heavily.
I don't,
think it's
I
just
disagree.
that.
I disagree. I feel like that loneliness has spiked. To be completely honest, this is going to sound maybe embarrassing, but it's true. Like, I have very few female friends. I mean, then again, I think I have very few actual personal close friends in general, regardless of their gender. And I know a lot of the few female friends that I have are either already married or they've also given up on marriage. All of the male friends that I have are like in the same boat. They either got married at like 20 or 21, around your age, right? Or they've checked out, right? You know, they have completely given up hope of actually finding a spouse.
Well, do you feel
And-
like the value proposition has skewed?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, to be completely honest, I'm in this boat too, where I've gotten to a point where I just have kind of thought, okay, I guess I'm just never going to get married. I wanted to when I was younger, but I don't see any avenue for that to even be remotely a possibility at this point. And I feel like that I'm speaking for tens of millions of people when I say that. It's really, you know, it's not just embarrassing. It's kind of like scary to put that out there and be like, I feel like that I'm part of that generation, right? The younger millennial, older Zoomer. I'm one of the youngest millennials, right? These like people in their 20s, especially in their mid to late 20s at this point, where they've looked around and they're like, there is no option for finding a spouse, it feels like, because everything is like TikTok, online dating apps, which is all garbage.
Fake.
And even when you're on there, I mean, the statistics that was shown me in that video that you guys showed me, it was like 85% of women will, you know, swipe left, right? And it feels like that they just have these really high physical standards, right? Where it was, what was the thing? I'm looking for the 6 foot tall guy that makes $100,000, and then the
Right.
guy pointed out, okay, so that is 0.3% of the
the
entire
global
population.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people think it's like 10 to 15 or 20% of the
Yeah.
population are this. And so, like, talking about this is why I still disagree with you. Maybe we're using different phrases, but I still disagree with you with the whole lower your expectations. When you're talking about physical expectations, I feel like those are way too high. I really do. I don't think that people realize how few 6 foot tall, $100,000 a year men or women for that matter are out there. And I don't know what to say. Like,
I think it's the wrong word. They need to reorient their expectations.
sure, but to that point, this woman whose videos you played, you know, pointed out that like there's a very small segment of the population that gets all of the attention, right?
Yeah.
And everybody else gets nothing.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people have also looked at the way that relationships and marriages have evolved, and they're like, well, I don't even want anything anyway.
Well, Pearl Davis put it this. That's the Just Pearly things. Pearl Davis put it
Right.
this way. She goes, the proposition for men nowadays, and this is her word. She goes, men value youth and purity, right? That's her words. She goes, the proposition for men nowadays is that you're going to marry someone that's going to be, you know, in their mid to late 20s, right? They've already gone through college. They've already slept around. They've already done, you know, these other things. And then, oh, by the way, once they get married to the man, the government will essentially pay her to divorce the man and take his kids.
Right.
and half of his money.
Right, and half of his
Right.
money, and in the meantime, the guy's thinking, okay, well, there's a whole lot of risk involved to getting married to someone that might not possess the things that I actually want. Whereas there's this whole culture of women now that will simply give up the physical Right? That used to be something that women demanded from men within the context of marriage. And it was actually, it was in some ways a safety thing for women. And in a lot of ways too, it was a civilizing thing for man. Right? But when that, and this is the part where I've said this before and it makes people mad sometimes, and I really don't care because I think it's true. And that is that if you look at modern feminism and what it's become, I feel as if that at some point during the feminist movement, it transitioned from we want equality before the law, and oh, by the way, we want men to step up and actually fulfill their responsibilities within society instead of being drunk and promiscuous. And the most lecherous society, or the most lecherous aspect of men got together and said, what if we just let you be drunk and lecherous as well? Like, what if we let you engage in hookup culture?
And that's not an endorsement of prohibition, by the way. That
No, it's just this idea that it's almost as if so much of what women were rebelling against was not just injustice within our legal codes, but it was the diminished standards by which men were living and failing to live up to their responsibilities. And the worst aspect of those men said, well, what if we just let you do the same?
Right.
What if we give up on all these things that actually bring a whole lot more meaning and purpose and stability to life in general, not to mention joy and happiness and success? And what if we just traded it all for, I don't know, base physical gratification?
Right. Yeah, that really bothers me about feminism is how quickly it literally becomes the tool of the patriarchy. Like just recently they literally redefined women, and I'm just thinking this is how they win. This is how men keep the upper hand that they supposedly always wanted, right? And feminists have just given it to them. I know we only have about 15 minutes left here. So I wanted to kind of go through like a quick checklist of what we've been talking about. So we talked about having the right standards and looking for the correct things, knowing what you're looking for, making yourself the kind of person who's a good spouse, where to look for a spouse, and then we run into this kind of prickly issue of women are in the mindset that they deserve maybe more than they're entitled. It's very difficult to pin down. But it's an issue of women being entitled to half of everything a man has and a man having no recourse, which extremely disincentivizes marriages. And I would argue that that is why it is so pivotal to find a partner and to never even really engage with anyone who doesn't see eye to eye with you on the value of marriage. This should probably be one of the first things you talk about, maybe on a second date, something like that.
Yeah.
Because you need to know that you have the same values. You don't want to put yourself in a position, you don't want to take the risk of being at the mercy of the judicial system when it comes to being up against all of this law that's so clearly against men.
So yeah, you got to establish that before you develop the feelings, which is why you need to talk early, because once your feelings are involved, when's the last time you made a great decision based on emotions? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the whole follow your heart garbage.
But-
my portfolio certainly.
But Christian tried to say that we didn't tell him where to find people, but I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no,
it's not about where.
Wait. To Christian's point, though, Christian brings up something that I do think, and this is something we didn't experience as much when we were Christian's age, because there was no social media when we were dating.
Right.
There was none of this.
No, there
swipe
was
left.
MySpace.
Yeah, there was. That was even after we were married. There was no swipe left, swipe right. There was none of this. There was none of this thing where I could go to an app and all of a sudden be sitting there as if I was some sort of king or queen, like just deciding which one might be worthy of me. Like that is an incredible. I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about this as well, and he talks about it where he basically talks about the dangers of pornography. And what this actually means for society when you've created, and again, I don't like to call it unattainable expectations. I much prefer to call it, because I think it's more accurate, inappropriate, wrong, and perverse expectations, but will actually take you farther away from what will really bring you genuine joy and happiness. Yes. And so to that point, I'm not suggesting well, look, we did it, it's easy. I'm not suggesting that at all. I think the environment that you and Hamilton find yourselves in, very different from the environment that I found myself in. That doesn't change the nature of the fundamentals. The nature of the fundamentals, that doesn't change. If you might have a much more dangerous jungle that you got to fight through, right? But if it's worth it, The fundamentals remain the same. The fundamentals are you need to find someone with a similar worldview. That's theologically and to some degree politically. I don't mean party. I don't mean partisanship. I just mean a similar worldview with respect to how you explain why things are the way they are and how you're going to address it together. Right. The second component of that is making sure that you guys actually have some sort of similar mission set with respect to your life. Right. And that does have to do with certain ambitions or interests and things of that nature. And it doesn't mean you're not going to sacrifice for one another at times. You will. And you have to be prepared to do that because once you become married, the marriage becomes the ultimate objective. Right. But you also don't want to enter into a relationship where one side has to continually sacrifice for the other while receiving nothing in return. And then the third component of that, because you can actually identify a lot of those things fairly quickly. Fairly quickly, you can identify, you can at least exclude people that don't come anywhere near that, right? As long as you're going into places where you have a higher degree of probability of meeting someone that agrees. Then when you start getting into other questions, before I had ever asked Tina to marry me, we had conversations about what are your expectations from your husband? Like we asked those questions. What do you expect me to do? What do you expect me to do around the house? What do you expect me to do outside the house?
When you have children,
what do you plan to do?
I
have to interrupt you because we're almost out of time, and I still don't think that we're. I don't think that we're just looking at this from the same perspective. You keep talking about, well, we have these conversations about these important things, and I agree those are all important. What I'm talking about is there is nobody to have that conversation with.
Okay. Here's why that's bullcrap, and this is where this just becomes defeatism. So we've had this question before. All right, so we laid out a very logical explanation of if you have this sort of worldview, where are you most likely to find that person? Your response even was, I'm probably most likely to find them within a church environment or some sort of environment of that nature. Great. How many churches have you been to in the last 2 years?
One.
Your answer was one. All right, so
one
again,
church service?
You've decided,
one church.
You've decided that the journey is difficult, and so have decided not to make it. That's different. That's different. Now, I think you are amazingly selling yourself short in this entire endeavor. Not to mention, I also think you're selling the female of the species short in this whole thing. Not because there aren't going to be times where you run into bumps or problems. Again, I'm not trying to minimize that. But you can't tell me there's no one when if you've identified this is the place where I most likely meet it, and I haven't been any of it in 2 years. You would never accept that argument from anybody else.
Okay, but you also yesterday told me the whole point of going to church is not to shop around for a spouse.
No, that's true.
Right?
true.
So, going to 18 different churches to try to find a spouse. All that I'm trying to say is that, and look, I get that I'm being the one who's being beat up because I'm the one sitting at the table asking the questions. But in my defense,
beat up.
I'm asking a lot of questions that I feel like a lot of people in Hamilton and I's age are having.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't have the opportunity to ask them. I do. Because I'm the one staring across from
Let
the
me ask
table
you,
from you.
Hamilton, do you feel the same way? Like, what are your thoughts on what Christian's saying?
No. I think so. Again, we're looking at this logically, right? We've articulated some of the things that are really important if you want to set yourself up for success with respect to marriage. And now we're going through the logical obstacles that exist. You guys live in a smaller town with an older population. So you're right. You don't have as many options as if you did if you lived in New York City. Right, a lot more would present themselves. However, a lot more bad options would also present themselves.
That's true.
I also want to point out that I am not of the opinion that dating apps are necessary. Not all of them are bad, and I have actually seen a few marriages result from that.
Marriages.
Good marriages, good matches, and I really believe that one of the reasons why is because when you're completely honest on there. And you do actually find somebody that sees all of that and is like, that matches me, and they've been completely honest, then this is actually probably going to be a good match. And I know people that this has really worked for. And there are a lot of people that are just not in the environment to be able to find someone like that. I would suggest trying to find a dating app that isn't secular. Or heavily secular.
No,
in our previous episode, we talked about, or at least I briefly at the very end of it talked about like the self-sorting ideologically, not just geographically, but also on the corporate side, right? Where we've seen some of these extremely woke corporations lose conservative, customers, and now conservatives are increasingly being like, I want to find a company to spend my money at that actually shares my values. You might see something similar with the dating world, where I would not be surprised in like 5 to 10 years. At that point, it might be too late for Hamilton.
Well, they
and
do
I, but
exist.
I would not
No,
be
they do.
surprised if in 5 to 10 years you have an exclusively liberal, exclusively conservative set of dating platforms where they're
there's been-
sorting them out by your
There
ideology.
have been multiple hits seen, and none of them have worked.
Yeah, but how many times? I mean, how many times was there? There an attempt to create an airplane before one finally worked?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, and I also
you're
think
right.
that there's kind of a
this-
stigma of putting yourself onto one of those apps. I do know people that, like one couple I know who met each other on a dating app. Don't tell people that they met
Yeah.
that way because they're embarrassed that they met that way. And the problem is if it works, it works. Why
I
be
had
ashamed of it?
Well,
Just do
I
it.
want to add some bit of context to that. It is all about competition on dating apps.
Yeah.
The top 5% of men get all of the swipes, and the top 5% of the men spend hours strategizing their accounts. I know this because I'm a social media
But they're
strategist.
strategizing.
This is why I don't
Hold on.
even try.
Hold on. I don't try at that game because I'm not going to go spend 2, 3, 4 Saturdays taking hundreds of photos to find 3 that are the most becoming that can compete against these other guys who have the Instagram pages with.
That is the wrong way to look at it because if a woman is going on there and swiping whatever, you've dodged a bullet, dude.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that is not a space I want to operate
No,
in.
and if you
Yeah.
don't want to, that's fine. But I would say, like, so we had a good friend of mine, just great dude. He met his wife on eHarmony, and it was the same thing. He didn't want to tell people that he met her online. But the reason why, they have a great marriage, the reason why is because they weren't this. It wasn't a system that was set up to just be like swipe left, swipe right. I'm going through. It was one that it said that there were certain criteria that had to be met before you even had options to see them. Right. So they were
And they
meeting.
were honest
So
in
they
their
were
profile.
meeting on the fun. Again, it goes back to those fundamental criteria. If you're not meeting on the fundamental criteria first,
Yeah.
the politics don't matter. The other stuff doesn't matter.
Hinge and Upward both do that very well.
So
My big thing about the dating app thing is you have to be honest. Don't put on some kind of retouched photo. Be who you are. Be honest about who you are.
But the
and what
reason that doesn't
matters.
work is because, as Hamilton pointed out, it's what 85. What was the percentage again?
like women only like swipe whatever the right or left. I think right's accept, left is not accept.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay,
Yeah.
so women only do it like 5 to 10% of the time. Men do it like 70% of the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so like you can't be honest about your like. Here's an example. I'm 5'5". People who are watching this show probably don't know that because I'm sitting in a chair right now. I am probably the shortest person in this entire room. I'm massively shorter than the average guy. That immediately, with the way that you see dating, especially in online, cancels me out 95
again,
plus
so
percent of
here-
the time
here's
because
what I-
women don't want somebody that's
So-
5'5".
The problem is though is that you don't want the type of woman who would do that.
Yeah.
That's the problem is that I see
It's
I
just-
see men that are shorter with gorgeous wives all the time.
Yeah, but they're
And-
usually rich.
No, not necessarily. It's I think you are kind of doing women a disservice because there are a lot of shallow women out there, but then there are some genuine ones. And most women, I mean, I hope that most women wouldn't be like that. And if there is a girl who's like, all these women are swiping and rejecting you, be glad they rejected you now. You know what I mean? It's you dodged a bullet.
No, I agree
If
with
she
that.
was-
I don't want to be
So
with somebody
the
that's
point-
superficially.
again, and we're not telling you got to do this particular route. We're saying that when the response is there's no one out there. Okay, again, the question back is, okay, great, where have you looked? And if the answer is, well, nowhere because they're not there. All right, well, that's not, okay, that's, again, you would never accept that reasoning. You would never accept that argumentation as being
Fair
acceptable
point.
in any other area. So again, this is, okay, can I say this is the last part I want to talk about with respect to expectations that I think has been set up that has been really, really faulty. And that's this idea that this is just something that just kind of magically happens right? You meet the king or you meet the prince as you're, singing in a meadow somewhere, right? And he just rides up on a steed, or she walks into your bakery, right? Like, that is not how this stuff typically happens. We have this again, I don't even like to call it romanticized, because it's not. It's just garbage. It's this garbage view of how and I'll put it this way. If you guys were going to look at purchasing a house, right? Or a decent car, or you were going to look at your career choice, the amount of analysis and time and effort that you would put into properly understanding the environment and what you needed to do to succeed in that environment would be significantly higher, because no one has given you any expectation that all of a sudden one day you're going to be singing through a freaking meadow and the perfect house is going to show up. Nobody is giving you the expectation that one day you're just going to graduate and all of a sudden you're going to be a millionaire because you're there. They don't give you those expectations. But when it comes to relationships or marriage, all of a sudden you've got this litany of absolute Hollywood garbage, setting this crappy expectation that makes no sense the moment you step back from it and you actually logically analyze it. And then
I'm
it's
going to end with
this is all garbage.
The difference is that a house can't say, I'm sorry, I only accept homeowners that are over 5'5".
That's fair.
That's
and
it.
I want to speak to this, Christian, because I don't know if you met me and Andy when we were there in Culpeper. My husband is 4 inches shorter than I am. Not even something that I considered, because I'm not that kind of person. I love everything about my husband. His height is irrelevant. When you are looking for the right kind of person, I personally do not think that the height will matter one bit. And she might be the same height as you. She might be a little bit taller than you. It might be something that you guys laugh about. But I don't see that being an issue if your priorities are correct. I think, so in summary, I know we're trying to close. It's going a little bit long, which makes sense because it's a great conversation. But I think that if you are oriented properly and working on yourself, then you're going to have less time to worry about the ups and downs of dating. I know that dating is hard right now. Trust me. And Andy knew this very well before we got married as well. But the thing is that if you are working very hard to better yourself and turn yourself into the right kind of spouse, then I don't think dating is going to get you down as much as it would if you were just kind of waiting for the right person to come along and looking at the statistics and kind of fixating on that. If you're working on your own thing, working on improving yourself. You, Christian, are still in your 20s. I don't see this being a big issue. And that's the other thing. Age is not in women's best interest. Age is in men's best interest. Men gather value as they get older. Women do not.
That is
which I know is a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah,
but
we age like milk in the sun.
Not true, baby.
Right. It's not
wine.
a joke. And obviously different women age differently. Different women accept it graciously. Some don't. Some pretend it's not an issue and they can still do whatever they want. That is not correct. But in any case, what you're trying to do, look, we know that hard times create strong men. And from what I can see of the dating pool right now, this is 100% a hard time that is going to come up with some strong people. And I would leave everybody on that slightly more positive note and encourage them really, really strongly to work their best to turn themselves into the kind of person that they would want to date. Because I don't think you can say anything more than that. I think that's just the best possible approach.
I'm so glad that we brought Lydia on, because every time that I come out there and I'm like, we're all doomed. This is I'm just glad that there was like an optimistic spin, to contrast with my super pessimistic one, because I mean, we've seen it with this case, but I'm willing to bet that in future episodes, we'll see it on the political side too. This year kind of throws people off, because if they've only recently been watching, they might be like, Christian's actually too optimistic, right? Because the election results was the one time that I was too optimistic. But yeah, I promise you that's not the norm.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, I think this is a great conversation. I want to thank our sponsor, Freedom Brides.
Okay.
I'm kidding. No, listen, I think this is a fun conversation. We've actually talked about like breaking this down and actually, doing a little bit more on in future episodes. So go on to Volley Chat. Let us know what you think. Let us know in the comments section. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great holiday season, and we'll see you next episode.